it's always interesting to observe this transition from our ordinary interactive way of communicating when we start addressing the Dhamma and practice. It sort of adds a sort of note of, how I say it, seriousness. It's sort of a shift of attention, which is of course precisely what these evenings are about. Although it's called a Theravada class, you've probably, if you've been coming for some time, have noticed it as the open-minded tradition as we experience it and have had it taught to us by the monks and nuns at Amaravati and Chithurst and the other Thai forest Sangha monasteries in the UK. But behind it all, there is a very serious and really a commitment, very authentic commitment, genuine, serious commitment to practice and inquiry, really, which is what the Buddhist tradition, I think, has at its heart. We'll be doing some chanting this evening. I thought we might do a little bit different to what we normally do. We will do the dedication of offerings, but I thought we'd do it in English because these chanted dedication of offerings and also the recollections of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, when sung in English or chanted in English, do convey the sort of acknowledgement of where these teachings come from. If one's had any serious contact with the academic tradition, it's always important to validate and acknowledge sources, to attribute the sources of either comments or ideas or perceptions. And although Buddhist teachings and practice in the form of mindfulness has spread widely through society, it's not often fully acknowledged as to where it comes from, what it should be attributed to. And I think the thing that the Theravada tradition has to offer, and certainly the Forest Sangha tradition within that, is this recognition that these teachings were, as it were, quote unquote, discovered at a time when, you know, Stonehenge was being built. We had teachings of the sublimest level coming out of countries such as India, and of course that includes the Buddha's teachings and reflections. And it's quite extraordinary how universal they are, how non-partisan, how open-minded, how they appeal just to our innate intelligence and our own common sense, and how applicable they are to current conditions. So with that sort of perspective in mind, we'll do some chanting. You're very free, very welcome to join in or not. If you have a candle, you're welcome to light it. I'll be lighting a candle on the shrine behind me. After we've done the chanting, when we sit in meditation, there'll be a slight innovation for this class. We'll have a screenshot of Buddha Rupa, which Odin of the Buddhist Society has suggested we try out. And we'll see how that is for people, whether people are happy with just having a screenshot of a Buddha Rupa. Most of us meditate with our eyes closed, but if we do open them, we'll have an inspiring figure of the Buddha meditating. So we'll go to page 19 and the dedication of offerings in English. And, just light the candle. Feel free to bow. To the Blessed One, the Lord who fully attained perfect enlightenment, to the teaching which he expounded so well, and to the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, To these, the Buddha, the Dhamma, and the Sangha, we render with offerings our rightful homage. It is well for us that the Blessed One, having attained liberation, still had compassion for later generations. May these simple offerings be accepted for our long-lasting benefit and for the happiness it gives us. The Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed One, I render homage to the Buddha, the Blessed One. The teaching so completely explained by him, I bow to the Dhamma. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, I bow to the Sangha. And let's go to page 21, Recollection of the Buddha. Now let us chant the Recollection of the Buddha. A good word of the Blessed One's reputation has spread as follows. He, the Blessed One, is indeed the Pure One, the perfectly enlightened One. He is impeccable in conduct and understanding, the accomplished One, the knower of the worlds. He trains perfectly those who wish to be trained. He is teacher of gods and humans. He is awake and holy. Go to page 25, Recollection of the Dhamma. The Dhamma is well expounded by the Blessed One, apparent here and now, timeless, encouraging investigation, leading inwards, to be experienced individually by the wise. And then on page 27, Recollection of the Sangha. They are the Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well, who have practiced directly, who have practiced insightfully, those who practice with integrity. That is the 4 pairs, the 8 kinds of noble beings. These are the Blessed One's disciples. Such ones are worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of respect. They give occasion for incomparable goodness to arise in the world. And then we'll go to page 128. And here we'll chant in Pali and in English, the first 2 paragraphs. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Homage to the Blessed, Noble, and Perfectly Enlightened One. Homage to the Blessed, Noble, and Perfectly Enlightened One. Homage to the Blessed, Noble, and Perfectly Enlightened One. And we'll continue down the page. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. To the Buddha I go for refuge. To the Dhamma I go for refuge. To the Sangha I go for refuge. Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. For the second time to the Buddha I go for refuge. For the second time to the Dhamma I go for refuge. For the second time to the Sangha I go for refuge. Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi sangham saranam gacchami. For the third time to the Buddha I go for refuge. For the third time to the Dhamma I go for refuge. For the third time to the Sangha I go for refuge. And we'll go straight through to the 5 precepts in Pali and in English. Panatipata veramani sekhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking the life of any living creature. Adinadana veramani sekhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from taking that which is not given. Kame sume chachara veramani sekhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from sexual misconduct. Musawada veramani sekhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from lying. Surameraya majja pamadatana veramani sekhapadam samadhiyami. I undertake the precept to refrain from consuming intoxicating drinking drugs, which lead to carelessness. Imani pancha sikhapadani silena sugatim yanti, silena bhagasampada, silena nibutim yanti, tasmat siddham visodaye. These are the 5 precepts. Virtue is the source of happiness. Virtue is the source of true wealth. Virtue is the source of peacefulness. Therefore, let virtue be purified. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And if you wish, we can bow 3 times. So, chanting the determination of the 5 precepts is really articulating vocally and physically with our bodies this commitment we make to live by certain standards of integrity, and we benefit from these reminders, and chanting them just adds another dimension. It's not just an intellectual exercise, it's actually a much more embodied exercise. And it's always good to, as it were, reflect on what we're chanting, which is why chanting in English can be helpful if we're not fluent in Pali, just to reaffirm what we might know very immediately in the present moment. So we'll sit quietly for a bit, something like 25 minutes or so, perhaps half an hour, and just start exactly where we are, so we don't dive in the deep end. We just notice our environment, take stock of our mental frame of mind, just notice what that's like. Notice our body, see whether it's comfortably positioned, an upright back, chin very slightly tucked in, just to make sure that we put a nice upright posture. And just taking time to notice the breath without trying to change it in any way. Sort of checking in process, ticking the boxes. And then generally speaking, as the body starts relaxing, breathing starts settling down, slowing down a bit perhaps. And if we're feeling still a little bit agitated or not fully settled, we can take a slightly deeper in-breath and allow the exhalation from that in-breath to run its course, and then just pause for 2 or 3 seconds at the end of the out-breath, which triggers even more of a relaxed state, a calm practice. You can close the eyes if you wish to. A bit like having a glass of water and just placing it on a hard, solid surface and just allowing any sediment to settle, any ripples to still, just by observing, witnessing, being present to the body and the breath. Not trying to suppress any thoughts, at the same time not encouraging them. Just using the breath as a reference point, as an anchor. Thoughts can come and go, feelings can come and go. We just notice the flow of air with the in-breath and the exhalation. And our practice is simply about present in this moment with the here. Noticing what the mind might be getting up to. Noticing how present we are to what we're actually experiencing. The body sitting, breathing, different sensations of the body as it breathes. How pleasant this might feel, or unpleasant, or just neutral, indifferent. Noticing how that influences our general state of the mind, affect or tonal level of emotion. And noticing how easily it is to slip into thought and get caught up in a topic or a theme. And using that moment of awareness to simply come back to the breath and the body. Checking into our posture. Noticing our breathing. The beginning of a breath. The middle of a breath. And the end of a breath. It's gently disentangling oneself from getting caught up in thoughts, ruminations, conversations. Time to let go. And just be present. And if there is some issue churning away, some unfinished business, let it churn away. Just go to the sensations and stay with the sensations of churning. Just breathe in and breathe out. And again, just checking in, seeing where one's attention has gone to, whether it's present or absorbed in some story. Noticing the body. Stillness of the body. The inhalation and exhalation. So making a gentle transition out of meditation. With the eyes closed, you can open the eyes, take in the room, the surroundings you're in. Notice the body. And notice also the quality of mind, the sort of tone of mind. So when we limit the exposure we have to external data, the mind, which is always seeking stimulation, looking for impressions, turns inwards, and we start noticing what happens inside. So this internal process becomes more apparent. And we realize what a rich process our internal world is. But we also, as part of the process of becoming more aware, we reduce the amount of internal phenomena by not paying too much attention or getting caught up in our thoughts. We bring our attention just to the immediacy of the physical experience, of breath, of body, of physical sensations. It's a very helpful practice of naming or noting, which just helps keep our attention aligned with what we're actually noticing, to objectify our experience, to minimize getting lost, reduce the chance of getting lost in a train of thought or an issue or a drama. So just by naming whatever we're experiencing, we just give it a label. So if we get caught up in thought, we can just say to ourselves, thinking. That immediately objectifies the process. It immediately sets up an observer who declares what is being experienced. So it just shows the subtle difference between a thought and knowing that we're thinking, so we don't get caught up in the contents of our thought. It could be a feeling that we get caught up in, an emotion, perhaps some emotional drama in our lives, in our relationship. And we might just say emotion, as opposed to getting lost either in the sadness or the anger or the frustration, whatever the situation is that we've got caught up in. We might get very caught up in a sensation of the body. It could be painful. It could have pain too, just notice pain. So just a simple labeling of each experience one has to be, I have found, a little bit careful with this practice because it can get a bit mechanical. Our minds are very adaptable, and we can, a bit like driving, we can be driving and actually not paying attention to our driving because we're driving sort of on automatic pilot. If we do the noting sort of practice, we can say thinking, try as it were to step out of the contents of our thought. But after we've been doing it for some time, we find that we say thinking and it doesn't stop us at all. We just carry on thinking and getting lost in our thoughts. It's also helpful to remember that we can have an idea of how meditation should be taking place, how we should be doing it. But the reality of what actually we experience can be quite different to the ideal we might have. So we very often sort of associate and hear injunctions to meditate. And it's all about being calm and still and firmly established on one's cushion or seat. But we all live in the world and we get caught up in many dramas in the world. Relationships with people we either love or don't love, friends, family dramas, work issues, stressful situations in paying bills or clarifying misunderstandings with bureaucracy, local authority, whoever happens to be prominent in your life. And that stirs up a lot of emotions, of fear perhaps, of threat, of anger, frustration, perhaps not being misunderstood, not being understood by somebody who is important to one. And it's really a big ask not to have the mind go into that territory when we're sitting quietly on the cushion. And it becomes far from a quiet sit. It can be actually one which is full of drama, of he said, she said, I said, he said. And it's very difficult to let go of something which feels so significant and important. So different strategies one can take. The best one, of course, is to, as it were, notice what's happening and come back to the breath. The injunction of letting go implies that one can let go, sometimes one can't. If it comes to a state of affairs where we can't let go of whatever the drama is, we just have to suffer it. But what we can do is try not to fuel the internal conflict, the internal debate, the sense of justification, and just do the very best we can to go to the emotions, to go to the sensations, and not get lost in the narrative, which is always about rationalization, justification. It's not fair. He should have done this, she should have said that, I should have done this, I should have said that. Because the moment we get caught up in that dialogue of who said what to whom, and try, it doesn't lead anywhere. Doesn't lead anywhere. So meditations can at that point become a space for reflection, but most of all, calming down of the emotions. And calming down is to allow them to calm down, not to fuel them, not to feed them, which is why going to the actual physical sensations in the body is so important. Because the body holds the information, the emotional content. And the sensations are there reflecting that the content is painful, disruptive in some way. So instead of perpetuating the sense of injustice or trying to rationalize or justify one's position, if we just go to the heart of the emotion and accept the pain and the discomfort those emotions embody, it's allowing that pain to come into consciousness. And something very subtle begins to happen. When it comes into awareness, when this pain comes into full awareness, it actually finds a resolution. It can be a slow process, it can be a fast process. It all depends on one's makeup, the situation, how long it's been going on for. And sometimes it can take a while. But there is one aspect of phenomena which none of us can deny, and that is that all phenomena, that includes emotional and mental phenomena, has a process of beginning, middle, and end. It eventually does expire. We can fuel it with the sense of injustice that we might have experienced, trying to justify our position, but that just perpetuates it. If we just go into the heart of the fire, as it were, to the heart of the pain, something miraculous happens. It's a very painful process, but it's what we could call it, I like to call it a purification process. The issue, as it were, stops losing its significance. And when I say it loses its significance, one finds perhaps a different relationship to it. It might mean that even in a meditation session, which is primarily and intentionally focused on breathing, on calming, can actually give rise to some sort of a solution. One can reflect and perhaps think that it might be good if I had a conversation about this with the person I was in contention with. It can engage a constructive response to avoid getting angry, to try and communicate how one feels factually, instead of pointing the finger and blaming the other person to how one is feeling. One could just declare that, when you said that, or when this happened, this is how it made me feel. Just to depersonalize it a little bit. Because life is full of these dramas for most of us. Some people maybe just sail through life completely unaware of the effect they have on others, or seem to be unaware of the effect others have on them. But most of us are sensitive. We do have feelings, we do have emotions which get hurt. And of course that leads on to a deeper level of reflection, which can sometimes happen in meditation as well. What is the sense of I that we're trying to protect? What is the sense of being somebody that requires so much protection, that requires a defensive or adversarial stance? Because essentially, at the heart of meditation is about acceptance of whatever's happening. If it's done in a safe environment, such as one's meditation room or your bedroom, wherever you happen to be sitting, where there's very little likelihood of being attacked or threatened by some external force, that's a safe environment to explore and investigate and inquire, and allow ourselves to experience the pain of a situation and go into a state of just unconditional acceptance, where you're not required to jump out of the way of a threatening vehicle or a threatening punch if things are getting very, very hot in the conflict you're caught up in. Because what we're trying to do is expand our capacity to cope with whatever arises. Develop a tolerance to the uncomfortable so that we become more dispassionate. That doesn't mean unfeeling, but it means less reactive. Or if the reactions do arise, we don't act on them. So in that sense, we become less reactive. I'm sure you've heard of this difference between reaction and response. The reaction is that reactive process when a surge of anger or injustice hits one. Response, just by the very meaning of the word, is a much more measured way of dealing with a conflicted situation. But if we're honest with ourselves, a lot of what we do when we do react, it is a reaction more often than not. The response is possible when we're feeling very calm, very benign, very equanimous. Then it's easy to find a response to a conflicted situation. But that's generally the direction of travel, is towards a response away from reaction. It's just helpful terminology to help understand the sort of complexity of our emotional life and how to deal with it when we're sitting in meditation. And this is, of course, where the importance of meditation as a regular practice comes in. Because what we find is that every time we sit on the cushion or on our favorite chair or meditation stool, different stuff will be happening. We'll have different experiences. And what we want to do, which is why regular practice is important, is be able to do our meditation, practice our quiet sitting in a regular pattern or some sort of a pattern which exposes us to all the states of mind, this whole spectrum of states of mind that we go through. So sometimes when life is going well, we sit down to sit quietly, and it may feel that there's no need to sit at all, and yet we've decided to sit. And we may sit down with a very happy, clappy frame of mind because something has gone very well, and we'd like to hold on to that state of mind. And what we find when we sit in meditation is that state of mind can fade. The novelty of the present experience or the present exchange or whatever has happened that has gone well suddenly fades in significance, and we get up after our 15, 20 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, feeling quite different about it. We might feel a sense of loss, or we may sit down feeling a bit discombobulated by some misunderstanding or just frustrating morning at one's desk or project or whatever one was doing. And one sits down and gets up after 20 minutes of quiet sitting, feeling much calmer, much more present, much more awake, and we tick that as a wonderful meditation. And then with that wonderful meditation in mind, we might sit down later on the same day to get a bit more of it and find that we don't get it. It doesn't happen. So what we're doing is establishing a pattern of memories and associations, which actually reveals the nature of phenomena. It's always changing. And we start learning just to be with all these changes. So you could call it a form of exposure therapy. We expose ourselves to the changing nature of phenomena, which allows us to accept and be with this phenomena just as it is. And that starts opening up the territory. It starts actually creating a sort of space around the contents of our practice, which develops a sort of a strength, one could say, a presence of its own, which is just about presence as opposed to getting caught up in the contents. And it's that presence of just being with situations that starts becoming, with practice and with perseverance, a dominant theme. And we start actually getting an experiential taste of what the mind has as a background state, as a primary state, which is just awareness. So we're gradually extracting ourselves from the contents of the mind, which are always fluctuating and changing in their nature. And when we start finding that inner stability, which seems to be there irrespective of what we're experiencing, we find that that stability is also apparent in our everyday life. We find that actually the situations that once may have been upsetting or discombobulating or distressing or exciting, there's a certain stillness behind all of this, which we become aware of. So we become literally more equanimous. We've actually changed our neurological response and physiological response to the ups and downs of everyday life. And we find a sense of stability, which is not dependent on the conditions we're experiencing, because we've generated a way of being, yes, which is right at that point of contact between awareness and the contents of awareness. And when we start discovering this, as it were, this magic, I call it magic in inverted commas, ingredient, we find that actually we're much happier in ourselves, and that this happiness is not dependent on what's happening outside. So we become more resilient, we become calmer, more insightful, we observe more, and we're effectively starting to reap the fruits of our practice. Fruits from the consistent or repetitive application of just sitting quietly on a regular basis, just observing all the sensations of the body, the emotions, feelings, and different mind states, and the contents of the mind. So I'd like to leave a little bit of time for any questions that people might have, because I've sort of touched on meditation in a hopefully in a helpful way, just to sort of make it, I don't know, make it sound more realistic and more attuned to your personal experiences. But of course, I don't know what your personal experiences are, but I'd be very welcome to share them and hear them. And if you have any questions, perhaps we can address them collectively in the time that we have left together. So if you wish to say or offer something, do feel free to unmute yourself and say what you might want to say or ask.
Hi, Nick, as well.
Hello, hi, Will.
Thank you very much for another great session. I had a question around feelings, so unpleasant, pleasant, and neutral feelings. And I was wondering, so if you could explain a bit more about neutral feelings. I sort of just going over whether it's neutral feelings are something that can be noticed in their own right, or whether they're just the absence of pleasant or unpleasant feelings. So maybe everything's a pleasant or an unpleasant, but they're just so subtle you can't notice it. Or is it something you can be mindful of in its own right, if you like?
It's a very good question. I think you've answered most of the question yourself in your spread of different variations. It's very interesting. I remember Thich Nhat Hanh talking about this, and he actually says that he finds neutral feelings actually quite pleasant. Is unable to categorize them as sort of completely indifferent. So I think he's sort of making a very similar point to you. You know, often neutral feelings just simply don't get noticed. We just take them for granted. Notice that if we're having a very positive or very negative feeling, there's an absence of neutral feeling. We're not indifferent to it. Really, it's just, instead of getting caught up in the content and the present nature of it, is to note it and be aware of it, as it were, objectifying it. Because all the time what we're trying to do is basically differentiate the contents of awareness from awareness itself, not to create a sort of schizoid state of mind, a sort of alienated awareness, but just to, as it were, observe the nature of phenomena from a, as it were, subjective yet scientific perspective, to observe its nature, so that we don't get caught up in these different states of mind completely blindly. It's not about not having them, but it's recognizing them and learning how to manage them, and eventually actually disentangling oneself from the power that emotions can have, the disruptive power. It doesn't stop us appreciating nature or beautiful situations or interesting conversations. Quite the opposite. It makes us very, very aware. But we just become participants in life, conscious participants in life, as opposed to victims of either our emotions or the circumstances we find ourselves in. That's how I describe it. So
thank you very much, Nick. Thanks.
wish to contribute a thought or an experience or share a perspective?
I do have a question, Nick, about, I think it's about listening to other people. I've got like it comes quite natural to me to listen to other people. But since I've been practicing, it seems like the listening becomes deeper and deeper. And sometimes it gets quite overwhelming because I think, is there anything like right listening, if you know what I mean? Is there a filter that you put in when you listen to people? Because sometimes it gets too much.
Could you say a bit more about what you mean when you say too much?
Let's say somebody talks a lot about negative things, and you get this feeling that you don't really want to hear that.
I understand. Yeah. Okay, it's a very good question. There is, absolutely. We have to learn how to listen deeply, but also regulate what we expose ourselves to. So the moment someone, let's say the example you've given of someone in a very negative frame of mind, just whining or going on and complaining and all the rest of it, you will very quickly become aware of your discomfort. But staying with one's discomfort is something that we practice when we sit for a set period of time on a cushion. I don't want to be here. Breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out. So you apply exactly the same technique as if you were sitting on a cushion. And you can actually learn a great deal from that experience, because what you can do is zone out of the content of what the person's saying and just be with them, knowing that you're dealing with someone in a very negative frame of mind and who's lost in their negative state of mind, but you don't join them. At the same time, you empathize with them, because a negative frame of mind actually is a suffering mind. But what you don't want to do is to become a victim of their suffering. So depending on the person and how well you know them and the context, yes, you can discourage that continuous thing by addressing, either asking some constructive questions, or at some point possibly even suggesting that you change the topic. There are different strategies, but you certainly don't just surrender to it and just allow it to fill you with all that negativity, because that's not very skillful. So we have to learn how to filter this stuff from us. So, but deep listening, which is something that Thich Nhat Hanh speaks a lot about, and it's very, very pertinent to the question, is really about being empathic, having the empathy to understand where someone is coming from. Because we can have wisdom in the head, but no wisdom in the heart. Wisdom in the head, when translated into a relationship, yes, essentially is compassion. It's about having compassion, feeling with, being with the person in a way that helps them feel understood. At the same time, we have to observe all the sort of social rules of engagement and somehow manage to find a way in adapting to those and being responsive in a way that is kind and truthful. If one can't say the truth, one remains silent. If one can communicate the truth, communicate it kindly in a way that actually is absorbable by the other person. And if you can't do it, you have to accept the state of equanimity and just be with it as it is.
Thank you. That's a few strategies I can use. Thank you very much.
A good question. Yeah. We easily forget that, our life, we're social beings. And the way we feel, the way we live, is always in one way or another interacting or not interacting with people, with others. And even when we're not interacting with people, we have a whole social scene going on in our head. For us all, and this includes monastics as well, relationship issues are really a crucible for practice, because that's where our emotions get engaged. it's very easy to create sort of an abstract image of how one should be as a meditator, or long to be a solitary meditator on a mountaintop somewhere with a beautiful view. The fact is that we live in the world, we live usually, most often than not, embedded in social constructs of one type or another, whether it be a family or a relationship or a community. And relationships impinge on our senses. And this whole question of who are we in relationship to others, who are we to ourselves, is really the question that the Buddha asked. You know, he was very aware of what a strong sense of identity we have and how protective we become of it, and how we identify with it, how we take things personally. And this is not to ignore our sensitivities, but it's basically, as it were, experience them through the light of wisdom and insight. And that's essentially what our practice is about. It's about developing an understanding, which initially means exposing ourselves on a mental level to the thoughts, the trains of thought, the suggestions, thinking about them, observing how they work in our everyday life, how relevant they might be, and gradually integrating them into our responses until they become, as it were, established. And you know, with being exposed to good teachers allows us to develop an intuitive sense of what feels right and what doesn't feel right. Because as we become more aware, we become more aware of our reactions and our responses. And when something doesn't ring true, we should listen to that and investigate it. If something does ring true, we should also listen to it and see if it applies in any constructive way to one's own life. The beauty of the Buddhist approach is that essentially it's not a faith-based approach. It can be, but it isn't at heart. At heart, it's an inquiry, it's an investigation into how things happen, into patterns, into relationships. And most of all, the cause and effect, that when we do something, it has an effect. When we don't do something, that also has an effect. So it's essentially about taking responsibility for our lives, developing an ability to respond to whatever we experience in a way that is constructive, and ultimately guided by the principles of truthfulness, respect, and kindness. And that's essentially what the path of practice is about. And all the rest that's sort of accumulated around it, whether it be rites, rituals, traditions, external forms, that's just external forms. It's just the bottle, as it were. What we want to do is to actually taste the contents of that bottle, and also see the contents of what other people, what their true nature is, and not the habits and patterns and things that we react to. That's just phenomena. What we want to get to is the heart of phenomena, yes, which is essentially awareness, and that's where we find the answer. And when we align ourselves and are aligned with, as it were, unconditioned awareness, we also start experiencing unconditional love and appreciation that we are in a complex system which is constantly struggling to become more conscious. And we're part of that universal process of potential greater consciousness and awareness. And we can realize that for ourselves. And that's, as it were, the good news of Buddhism. We can find happiness in our real nature, in our true nature. We will never find true happiness in phenomena, because it's always transient. Maybe wonderful for a while, but it'll fade. But if we find happiness in the unconditioned, then we have true peace, true happiness, true well-being.
Hi Nick, Mariano here.
Hello, Mariano.
Today in the Far East, it is a Nirvana day. Do you want to say something about the Nirvana?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Today, in the Far East, in the Northern tradition, they celebrate Nirvana Day. It is a major celebration on the 15th of February. Yeah? Do you want to say something about the Nirvana?
No. Perhaps you might like to tell us about Nirvana. Well, there are many words for it. But Nirvana essentially is about full realization. So full, so pure, so complete. There's everything is seen through for what it is, and for what it is. And to be able to do that, one has to be in speech. It's a very rare state to have someone perfect. We obviously, in our different ways, respect not only what the Buddha taught, but where he was teaching from. He was referred to himself as the Tathagata, which means becoming, or thus becoming, basically absolutely in the present moment. And by being fully and consciously present in the moment, an incredible breadth of understanding and compassion, basically pure in nature. These are all words, but they do point to something very special. And when we become sensitive to the values that he represents, we're affected by it, which is why practice is about something very concrete, very specific. It's not just a mental journey of exploration. It's about, and this is why the importance of Sangha is so great. What is Sangha? It's not just monastics in robes. The Sangha essentially is those, especially the sort of spiritual dimension of Sangha, is about those who are on the path, who have realized a great deal in their own lives. And this has an effect on everybody they come to contact with. If one has had the good fortune to meet highly evolved beings, it's absolutely tangible. We generate a field of energy around us. This is not speculation. It's not just in pictures or tankers. We know that we generate an electromagnetic field from our bodies, and that is very much not just a physiological process, it's also a reflection of the individual themselves. We get some personalities who generate very, very strong fields and very unwholesome fields, and you can think of quite a few political leaders who've had that capacity. They're described as charismatic because there's something about their presence. But if you meet someone who's very pure and very good and very kind and very wise, it can have an electrifying effect on one, especially if one is sensitive and attuned to that sort of level of communication. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it's worth reflecting on.
Thank you.
Right, I'm aware of time, and I thought what we could do is, unless there's anybody else who'd like to say something, I'd like to ask a question before we do end. I don't know how you felt about having the picture of the Buddha Rupa as a screen share whilst the reflections were offered. Would you prefer to see somebody, or are you happy just to have a disembodied voice for the Rupa on your screen? Is there any preference?
I actually could see you in a small window on the side and the Buddha Rupa in the middle, so I had both. Right,
okay. Oh, well, maybe that's the way to go. It feels a bit strange talking to a picture here, but I'm flexible. Whatever works best for participants. Next time we'll have to have a vote on it, perhaps. There's something new which has just been suggested. It's actually nice to have a few faces on my screen, because then at least I feel I'm talking to a variety of individuals, as opposed to just a picture. Otherwise, it's just like speaking into a telephone. A disembodied conversation. Oh, I've just had a little message. I'd rather see you. Right, okay. perhaps we'll go for that. I certainly feel more comfortable with that. We'll do that in the future. I thought we might do a nice simple chant to conclude with, which is the reflection on universal well-being. I really love that chant because it just covers so many. This is page 41. It's sort of well-wishing to everybody. And it also has a few little very truthful teachings in it about us being responsible for our actions and that there are consequences, whether we act skillfully or harmfully, and that's what we inherit. And I think it's helpful to remember that when we do talk about skillful or unskillful actions and that we inherit them, unfortunately, we also inherit the consequences of other people's skillful and unskillful actions. So it's good to appreciate the good ones and not encourage the harmful ones, because as the teachings on interdependence show and highlight and can be witnessed, we're in a collective process of human existence on a planet of which we're an integral part. And whatever we do affects not only ourselves, affects others as well, and the planet and life on this planet. So we'll all be muted and I'll just chant and you can join in your space, the reflection on universal well-being. Now let us chant the reflections on universal well-being. May I abide in well-being, in freedom from affliction, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may I maintain well-being in myself. May everyone abide in well-being, in freedom from hostility, in freedom from ill will, in freedom from anxiety, and may they maintain well-being in themselves. May all beings be released from all suffering, and may they not be parted from the good fortune they have attained. When they act upon intention, all beings are the owners of their action and inherit its results. Their future is born from such action, companion to such action, and its results will be their home. All actions with intention, be they skillful or harmful, of such acts they will be the heirs. It's always good to pause after a chant and just let it sink in, let it sink in. Right, well, we'll close with the closing homage, which is on page 16. And I thought it might be nice to chant it both in Pali and in English. If you have a shrine, do feel free to turn towards it. Araham Samma Sambuddho Bhagava, the Lord, the perfectly enlightened and blessed one, Buddham Bhagavantam Abhivademi. I render homage to the Buddha, the blessed one. Swakato Bhagavato Dhammo, the teaching so completely explained by him. Dhammam Namasami, I bow to the Dhamma. Supatipanno Bhagavato Sāvaka Sangho. The Blessed One's disciples who have practiced well. Sangham Namami. I bow to the Sangha. Right, well, that closes our session today, our class this evening. You're very welcome to stay on a little bit if you'd like to, but otherwise, Martin will be leading the class next week. So you're very welcome to come and join them. And I wish you all well. Stay safe, stay well. I hope lots of you have had the vaccination, unless you're an anti-vaxxer or feel immune to the virus. But anyhow, I wish you health and well-being, and look forward to seeing you in a fortnight's time.